I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You were there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here, and we have a really, really interesting show today. I'm kind of pivoting off the Chrystia Freeland incident, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but for our listeners in countries other than Canada, what we are about to talk about involving Chrystia Freeland, who is our Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister here. She's the one who froze the bank accounts of the convoy and people who donated, that lady. We're going to talk about how dissent and speech that is critical of the powers that be is now being slammed as some kind of an attack by crazed citizens who are trying to do harm to our politicians. That's what's happening now. It's certainly happening in the States, and it's happening here in a big, big way. And the Chrystia Freeland event is a pretty big example of it. So let me tell you who I've got, and then we'll talk about the event. I am so happy to present to you a guy named Chris Bray, B-R-A-Y, who he's a historian, military historian. I think he was an academic for a while too. A terribly smart cat. And also he's a journalist with a fantastic Substack that you must be reading. He's not only a brilliant thinker, he's also a terrific writer. And what I mean by that, writing, what is good writing? Good writing is translating complicated ideas into palatable bites, which isn't to say dumbed down, but he makes these things easy to understand, frequently funny, and he really injects a lot of his own personality into what he's doing on Substack. So you must be reading him. He's not like Hunter Thompson necessarily, but he does have a voice. And as far as I'm concerned, he's been hitting it out of the park day after day after day, so much so that he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson not that long ago for one of Carlson's 1 hour kind of special interview situations. So that's who we've got on today. I'm really happy to have him. And we're going to talk at the beginning of the interview anyway about the idea that if you criticize government with a loud voice or with too much aggression, that all of a sudden it's a big threat to national security and all hell breaks loose. And that is what happened about Chrystia Freeland. He looked at the video of the Chrystia Freeland event, and he's going to talk about it. He has a really interesting analysis of it, especially being in California. So let's just talk about what happened to Chrystia Freeland. So last Friday, I believe it was, a man in Grand Prairie, Alberta, according to, I think this is CBC, accosted Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and swore at her repeatedly as she entered the City Hall building. So I don't think she was accosted. Here's what happened. I've seen the tape. Forget it. I don't need to go with what the journalists are writing about this. So what happened was she was heading for an elevator, I guess, to go up, and a guy there who's obviously pretty mad said some nasty things to her and used the F word. Obviously, I don't dig that, but, people are angry right now, and they're specifically angry at her. There's a whole bunch of people in the country who remember very well her role in what happened when the Emergencies Act was invoked against the truckers, who we now know weren't doing anything particularly wrong. The big stories and allegations that provoked the Emergencies Act were not true. The scary foreign money wasn't true. The arson story wasn't true. The weapons story also not true. And she played a role, and her role was maybe the most scary one of all, more scary even than the police, who approached these peaceful protesters with truncheons on horseback. And that was the freezing of the bank accounts. And the bank accounts of people who just sent a little $20 or $50 donation to the Freedom Convoy that they believed in after 2 years of being beaten down by onerous and wrong-headed COVID policy, right? That was her deal. And it was a very big deal. And people around the world were talking about how awful it was that she'd done this. So we don't seem to have in this country anymore a way to express our anger at things like this. The media is no longer on the side of the people. They're not. They're part of the elite class. That is who they feel they represent. So there are many very, very angry people in this country. And using the F-bomb against Chrystia Freeland was not a particularly good look. But I understand why this guy was as angry as he was. And I think many, many people do. We cannot criminalize anger at our politicians and the people governing us. That's tyranny. We cannot do it. I didn't see that she was particularly threatened either. And remember, this happened before. They were calling out Jagmeet Singh at various events because he was giving the government here cover, in a sense, by doing this quasi-coalition situation that they have, which is kind of protecting the Liberals for a deal, which was dental care coming down the road. But it harms democracy, but it was legal, so he did it. People were mad. And so people were yelling at Jagmeet. And of course, initially, everybody said, oh, they're being racist, until it became very clear that many of the people who were yelling at Jagmeet were also Sikh. So that wasn't working. Everybody isn't racist or misogynistic. People are just voters and citizens, and they're mad and they want to be heard. And the problem with the rhetoric around these events is that it takes the focus away from, why are these people as angry as they are? Well, why are they angry? You would think if the government and the politicians in the various provinces really were concerned about fairly governing the country, they might want to get to the bottom of why people are so mad instead of flinging epithets at them. Or, get this, the RCMP are investigating this guy F-bombing Chrystia Freeland. Their RCMP are investigating the harassment of Chrystia Freeland in Alberta. Really, it was all caught on tape. It was pretty clear what happened. He lost his temper and he swore at her. But they're criminalizing this kind of dissent now, and that is not good. So Chris, Bray, and I are going to talk a lot about that in the interview coming up. I'm just going to quickly do my pitch to you for support. We have a Patreon, a PayPal, and now on Substack. And I'm writing on Substack, so you're going to get the occasional piece from me. It's usually when something is making me so angry, I've got to spit it out somewhere. So it's a bit of a release. But the thing about Substack is it's a censorship-free platform. So the money that you're pledging to the Substack is also supporting the podcast. That's kind of what we're doing now. So I would be grateful if you would consider making a small monthly pledge to keep us going. We've been going for over 2 and a bit years, over 1 million downloads. We're doing really well. And I think if you go back, if you're new and go back and look at the history of this show, based on journalism and my science background and just having been a reporter for like eons, we were first on many, many of the issues that are now showing themselves. We didn't wait for when it was safe to say some of the things we were saying about COVID-19 policy. Of course, we were very critical of lockdowns, very critical about a shortened clinical trials process for vaccines, many, many other things that are just logical, but the legacy media wasn't talking about. So go back and look at what we did. And if you like what we're doing and you think it's worth supporting, please do so. I'd be very grateful. We also have a really fun merch store with some interesting hats. Our No Hat is still selling. We have some Trucker Convoy merch too, if you're feeling nostalgic about those heady days when we actually thought we might have a voice. And so, do think about supporting us. I'd be very grateful if you did, and it helps to keep the lights on around here. And let's move on. So Chris Bray is coming up, but what I want to do is play for you our Prime Minister today responding to the Chrystia Freeland event. And it's going to make your skin crawl. So I'm just giving you a bit of a trigger warning there. I can't stand his voice even anymore. That's a terrible thing to say about the Prime Minister of the country I love, but I can't stand the manipulation and how everything that comes out of his mouth seems to be geared to buttress some kind of a propaganda point. So let's just hear our Prime Minister on the Chrystia Freeland event.
There's a huge reflection we have to have about the kind of country we want to be. And to understand that the tone of our democracy, the tone of our political debates is set by those politicians who get sent to Ottawa to represent their communities. And if there isn't clear condemnation of the kind of cowardly bullying we've seen, of the kind of hate-filled rants and violent words used against people, to say this has no place in our democracy, we can disagree, and we need to disagree with each other on policies, on perspectives. That's a robust debate that has to happen amongst Canadians to make sure we're getting it right as a collective, as a country. But to limit the ability of women, of racialized Canadians to serve in government or to hold government to account as journalists, which is the goal of a number of Canadians with very loud voices, well, that's something all parliamentarians and all leaders need to stand against, need to be unequivocal in being responsible leaders, to say, no, we are not going to become that toxic, polarized country that some think we should become.
Okay, so, the hateful rhetoric, the divisiveness, all of those things he said, he did those things to people who were declining to be vaccinated, right? He said the anti-vaxxers were a mob. He said they were racist. He said they were misogynistic. It was like he was talking about how we shouldn't even have space in the country. He was absolutely fomenting hate against people who disagreed with his policies. This cannot stand. If women do not go into politics, I hope Ms. Freeland would agree with this, and invoke their gender in order to escape aggressive criticism. This guy was standing, he wasn't following her into the elevator. She wasn't in any physical danger. For the Prime Minister to suggest that, in his words, racialized members of Parliament and women somehow deserve extra protection is absolute nonsense. I think it's an insult to women, actually, to say that. She's a tough girl. She can take it. And if she can't take criticism of what she does as an elected member of government, then she shouldn't be in government. Full stop. That's it. This stuff, this reframing of criticism of the government as bad behavior by the citizenry really must stop. And I think that Chris Bray probably agrees with me. So here's my interview with Chris Bray. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing really well, thank you. So you've been busy, boy. Your output on Substack is, it's really admirable. How do you do it? Do you ever sleep?
I never sleep and I never leave the house. I actually have been feeling for the last 2 days that I need to not be on Substack all the time, and I feel like I should go away into the mountains.
I know you wrote about that. Well, we all think that when we become indie journalists, that we will have better quality time, right? But we don't. We're always feeding the beast, aren't we? It's difficult.
Always aware that the beast is there. I just thought today that one of the people I read on Substack, God, I haven't heard from him for a long time. Why hasn't he been posting? And I went and looked at his page, and his last post was put up 23 hours ago. And I read it. I remembered reading it, but I woke up this morning and felt like, God, that guy's been silent for such a long time.
Yeah, it's it's going to be an interesting kind of shakeout, isn't it? Because I think that you and I probably read some of the same people. There's maybe 20 of us who kind of read the same people, and I absolutely love it. And I do feel that Substack is like the New Yorker used to be back in the day when it actually meant something. There's so many great people writing with interesting ideas on it. But it is a bit of a beast. Like I open my email box in the morning and it's like, whoa, I got to read those people. And then I kind of put them away and have to save them up for a time when I can read, because I probably should be writing. It'll be interesting to see how this shakes out, both as a business model for us and as something for people to subscribe to monetarily.
Yeah. So if, your old newspaper subscription, and I used to get, I think we all did, you got 2 or 3 newspapers every day. And there were probably, between the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times landing on my doorstep, probably 1,000 articles in there. And I never felt overwhelmed by it. But now I get, 10 or 12 separate emails. And I say, oh my God, this is too much to read. So there's some weird psychology to it that it feels overwhelming in ways that it would not if it was aggregated.
Well, I think maybe the problem, if you're like me, I don't do well reading on a screen.
Oh, I hate it.
I print most things off before. And I wonder if you printed off all the stuff that you want to read and read it the way you did the papers. You probably sit down at your breakfast table and have your coffee and maybe a cigarette, like I used to do when I smoked. And you made an event out of it, right? You were there for an hour, 45 minutes, on the weekend, maybe longer. I still do that with the Financial Times, actually, which is sort of weird, but because we get a paper copy of the Times here at the apartment. But yeah, so I do, there is a bit of tyranny about all the good stuff that's coming into my email box. I'm going to have to maybe curate it differently or something. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I do. This is us. I do tell my teenage daughter, put down that screen and read something on paper. And she looks at me like I'm a total idiot. She has no idea what I'm talking about. She says, this is reading.
Yeah.
So it's what she grew up with, and it doesn't feel different to her. I don't know what to think of it.
I don't know if they have the same attention span that we do, though. But I'm just an old person now, and I say things like I'm so smart. Oh, they don't know what they're doing, and they don't have the attention span. I don't know if I'm right about that or not. I feel like I am sort of right about it. But there is a guy who's written a book called The Shallows that talks about how exposure to a screen really decreases our ability to concentrate and focus. Yeah. And I believe that's true. I believe it's true.
I taught history classes for a few years at a small liberal arts college. And I taught a Wednesday evening, a 3-hour reading seminar where I signed a book and a couple of research articles every week. And then we sat down to have a 3-hour discussion about everything that we've read. And I saw over the course of just a few years how much harder that had become. And I would go around the table. I would start every class by saying, before I say anything, I want to hear from you. Like, what in the reading this week, what do you want to discuss? What's interesting to you? What's important to you? What didn't you understand? And there was like a switch thrown at some moment that people started going around the table and saying, oh, I don't really read it. So I see that happening. I think the transition to reading on screens means less and less reading. Yeah. And I'm very...
In shorter bursts.
Yeah, in shorter bursts. I'm very mindful of that when I write. As I pass my 10th paragraph, I'm like, oh, this is turning into a book-length dissertation. I need to wrap this up. 11 paragraphs.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think I'm going to do something quick. I'll just dash this off for people so they've got something from me. And then I end up spending 3 days on it.
Yeah.
And it's like way longer. Yeah. Anyway, I want to talk to you about a great little piece that you did, a couple pieces actually, on the Pennsbury School Board in Bucks County, PA. Is Bucks County wealthy?
I don't know the demographics of Bucks County. I should have looked that up. I don't know.
My feeling is that it is. I think it is. But it's the reason I was really glad I was talking to you today, because in the last couple of days there was an event with our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who's a person who's extremely divisive in this country. She did force the closure of bank accounts of people who were protesting and people gave $20 to the Freedom Convoy. Imagine, I mean, it's so tyrannical. Yeah. And a guy jumped out and yelled at her and used the F word. It was really bad. He shouldn't have done it. I get it. I'm a woman, a big guy swearing at you. It's not a good look. But the whole country and our uniparty politicians in Ottawa are all, we have to tone down the rhetoric. And nobody's asking what I think the main question is, which is, why is everybody so mad right now at the Liberal government and politicians in general? That's what they should be talking, but they're not. It's all, people are misogynistic toward. It's just so frustrating. So tell me about Pennsbury and how, because that also was about the way people in power were receiving critical speech, right?
Yeah, let's talk about the elevator first, because I saw that footage and I was fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by the response to it. He stopped. She was with other people. She went into an elevator. He stopped. He didn't follow her into the elevator. He stopped a good 10 feet away from the elevator. He told her forcefully and clearly what he thought, and then he left. And the exaggerated freak out about, oh my God, she was attacked, is, first of all, I think an attempt to change the subject from, why are people angry? Is it reasonable that they're angry? And I think, and pivoting to misogyny, like if Justin Trudeau, he was there, the guy wouldn't have yelled at him. It is another attempt to change the subject. We just had an important legislative defeat in California of a bill. We can talk about this later, SB 866, that would have allowed children to get the mRNA injections without parental knowledge or consent. And it passed in the state Senate and was in the lower house in the assembly, and the author pulled it. And that legislation is not going to pass. And all the news stories within an hour of him pulling it, if you did a Google search for SB 866, all of the headlines were the same. Anti-vaxxer violence causes senator to pull important bill, senator viciously attacked by extremists. And the framing of, we've done something that people don't like, and they've told us they disagree with us. Oh my God! Is an assault. It's an assault on the right of people to speak and have an opinion and make their opinion known forcefully. And I think it's pretty transparent. I don't think it's a real mystery why legislators and journalists, I would call them state-aligned journalists, talk that way. Why be upset that somebody yelled at a minister?
Well, I thank you, first of all, for saying that, because there are a lot of people in this country right now who are extremely, extremely frustrated. What happened around the convoy has left a stain and a scar on this country, because it quashed immediately a sense of hopefulness that a certain element of the population, i.e. people who were concerned about getting vaccinated with a product that had not been tested for a long time, and also the working class, who are really left out of the conversation here right now. So what she did, what the government did, but specifically the bank account thing, because what they did, Chris, was they got the names of all the people who'd given to Give, Send, Go, right? Mm-hmm. And went after them. And then that list of donors, they were doxxed by a shock jock who's got a Twitter account here. I mean, it was absolutely shocking. So there's a lot of, what's the word? People feeling that they are isolated. I know the same thing's happening in the States, but people feeling isolated from power. The media is not on their side. The government's not on their side, and even the opposition parties are all singing from the same songbook. So, of course, people are yelling.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As they've done before. Yeah.
As they've done before. But now, yes, this is absolutely a playbook. The media are either, it's like Taylor Lorenz sobbing, oh, he's being mean to me. You know, I mean, I can't, they're doing the same thing here. You know, we're all, we're getting death threats and stuff. Maybe if that's even true. But if it is true, why don't you figure out why everybody's mad at you?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's a tactic.
Yeah.
So Pensbury.
Yeah, let's talk about Pensbury. I love that story, and we're going to go up to the point where we play a piece of tape of Simon Campbell, that great piece of tape where he kind of goes for it.
Yeah.
So let's set it up for me. What happened there, and then why this was such a great moment.
So the Pensbury School District in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, was debating and then implemented a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy policy. And people disagreed with it and argued with it. They disagreed with and argued with the premises of the policy that the school district had proposed. And the diversity, equity, and inclusion administrator at the school district wrote an email message to the superintendent and the school board and said, we shouldn't allow this. We shouldn't allow people to criticize this policy because this policy is about racial justice. So any criticism of it is necessarily racist, and we should make it stop. She said we should stop tolerating people coming to board meetings and speaking at public comment and criticizing this policy. And the president of the board said, oh, I absolutely agree. You're right. I've been falling down in the job, and we need to do a better job. So at a meeting, I think it was in March of 2021, a series of people showed up to offer public comment about the diversity policy that was adopted in May. So in March, it was still being debated. And they criticized, specific language of it. They criticized presumptions that it contained. And a lawyer representing the school district, sitting up on the dais with the school board, kept cutting them off. He kept saying, all right, that's it. Your comment is over. And we're not going to tolerate that kind of discussion. At the public comment section of a public government meeting. And infamously, you have to listen to this because it's fascinating to hear. When people said, I'm not going to stop talking, I have a right to speak, he started shouting at them over and over again, you're done! You're done!
Wow. And
they were, forced to stop speaking. So that takes us through the conclusion of the setup of the controversy, and then Simon Campbell showed up at the next meeting and talked to them about what they'd done. Do you want to play that?
Yeah, let's play it, because what he said is it's a little bit of a roadmap, I think, for people to push back on some of this stuff. So let's hear the clip of Simon Campbell.
Simon Campbell, 1571 Brookfield Road, Lower Makefield Township. I'm a Pensbury School District resident, Pensbury School District taxpayer. I'm also a former member of the Governing Board of Directors, 2009 to 2013. It's nice to see the old faces. I'm here to speak today. I believe, Gary, you said it was item KKK in the agenda book. Well, isn't that just a perfect summation of what it is I'm here to talk about? KKK, your proposed new school board policy, seeking once again to limit the constitutionally protected speech of American citizens. Now, when I sat on this school board, I believe some of you old-timers might remember this. A union guy spoke at public comment for 5 minutes and ripped me a new one. He called me the bastard child of Margaret Thatcher. And I sat there and I said to myself, okay, fair enough. Welcome to America. He considers me a bastard because I'm in the government. His logic is sound. Now, what happened was the superintendent and the school solicitor at the time freaked out and they didn't put the tape online the next day. And I called them up and I said, get the tape online now before we get sued for censorship. I yelled at the solicitor and I asked him what law school he went to, because it was clearly constitutionally protected rhetorical hyperbole. I can cite the case if you'd like. And I said to Paul Long, the superintendent at the time, don't ever cut the tape again, Paul. And by the way, bastard child of Margaret Thatcher, I took it as a compliment. Now, you snowflakes apparently have a bigger problem with public comment. It seems to me that you think you can supersede the United States Constitution. Well, I've got news for you, School Board President Benito Mussolini. Your power does not supersede that of the US Constitution and the First Amendment rights of the citizens of this great nation. Let's be very, very clear who has the power.
Mr.
It is
Campbell,
not government policy. Do not warn me or do not interrupt my time.
That if you
interrupt my
make
time,
personal insults like that again, or if you personally direct your comments, you will be asked to step away from the podium.
I'm going to quote to you, Solicitor.
Make your comments,
I'm
but
quoting,
do not
just
do
a minute, do
name
not
calling
talk
like
over
you
me.
just did.
This is my comment, not your comment. I'm quoting to you now from the United States Supreme Court 1964 case, New York Times versus Sullivan. This is constitutional case law in this country, and I'm quoting you from the US Supreme Court. The judges wrote that this nation is founded on the, quote, profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues shall be uninhibited, robust, and wide open, and that it may well include vehement, caustic, and sometimes unpleasantly sharp attacks on government and public officials. That's constitutional case law in this nation. I don't have to be nice to you. Nobody behind me has to be nice to you. If you don't like living in the United States of America, then you can all move to Russia, Cuba, or China. This is the First Amendment. And I will caution you, Solicitor. There is a video camera to my left. If you edit this tape, then you're going to have a big legal problem on your hands, because my right to critique your fascism, which is what this is constitutionally protected. There are emails, public record emails, in which the Director of Equity is lobbying and advocating for public comment to be censored in this school district. And you know what? Lobbying for it, advocating for it. We've got the school board president saying she'll do better at hitting the mute button in blatant violation of the Constitution. For her lobbying and her advocacy of unconstitutional censorship, I want you, the school board, to terminate the employment of Dr. Charissa Gibson with immediate effect. And after you've terminated her employment, I want all of you to tender your resignations for hating on this country. We have a God-given constitutional right to critique you, and we can speak in any lawful tone that we see fit. And don't go looking around, Benito, because this is the United States of America. You have a good... one more thing. I want to make a verbal request right now for an unedited copy of the tape. So if any of you delete it, you're going to have a big legal problem. Good night.
Yeah, praise be. So, yeah, I think we need more Simon Campbells right now.
Yeah.
We need a whole bunch of Simon Campbells. He was amazing. But tell me how that played out at the end. They sort of won the day, didn't they? Because of that.
They did, and one of the things that the speakers said, both Simon Campbell said, you're about to have a big legal problem, and the speakers at the previous meeting, when they were silent, said, okay, I'll see you in court. And they did. They with the help of the, what's it called? The Institute for Free Speech, the IFS. They filed a lawsuit, a First Amendment lawsuit in federal court. Very quickly got a preliminary injunction forbidding the school district to enforce their policy silencing criticism. And then the school district settled with them and paid $300,000 to settle the case, most of which went to the lawyers. So they were sued and lost. And that lawyer you hear saying, I'm going to caution you, you'd better stop or you'll be cut off, he was fired as a school district lawyer.
Well, it's an amazing outcome. And we don't see a lot of victories like that these days. And the other thing about this story, what it illustrates to me, is how large the divide is and how much people on the other side in positions of authority hold their critics in low self-esteem. I mean, the school board was utterly hateful and disrespectful to the people there who didn't agree with what they were doing. We are seeing that here in Canada too. The Prime Minister was absolutely terrible to the Freedom Convoy truckers with all sorts of names, and he was actually, in my view, using hate speech against people who did not get vaccinated and encouraging them to be discriminated against in the worst way. So, I sort of don't really understand how we got here and I don't think it's on one side this, on the other side that, and let's all sing Kumbaya. I think the other side has really worked themselves into a hateful frenzy about people who disagree with them.
Yeah. So there's always a debate, particularly like if you read my Substack page, there's always a debate in the comment thread between they're idiots and they don't know what they're doing and they're incompetent, and how have they gotten so lost, and other people who say, you think this is incompetence, you think they don't notice. Like, this is a strategy, it's a choice. And I think with watching Justin Trudeau, watching his bizarre semi-reptilian, semi-robotic performance, his repetition, like he had the 4 or 5 phrases, we have all stood together as Canadians against the people who fly swastikas. Yeah. And he just sort of ritually, whatever the question was, however the question was framed, whatever portion of the controversy the question addressed, he stood up and he said, we have all stood together as Canadians against the people who fly swastikas.
Yeah,
like an animatronic figure, not like a person. In Justin Trudeau's case, I think that was his strategy. He, a very conscious and deliberate strategy that he had decided with his advisors not to grant any legitimacy to political opponents and to simply speak about them and about anyone who supported them or asked questions favorable to them as someone who had no point to make.
Yeah, absolutely.
As someone who was inherently illegitimate. So I think it was a strategy. But we're seeing all over the United States, the thing that happened in Pennsbury, we're seeing at other school districts and other city councils. We should talk about SB 1100 in a few minutes.
Sure.
But there was a school district meeting in Mankato, Minnesota, a few months ago, maybe last year, that the school board president said at the beginning of the meeting, I want to remind everyone in attendance that this meeting does not belong to the public. This meeting belongs to the school board, and we will use this time in the way that we choose to do the business we choose to do. And if we do not feel that comments you offer at the public comment period address business that we wish to address, you will no longer be permitted to speak. And I'm seeing that premise pop up all over the place. And I think, this meeting doesn't belong to you, it belongs to us. There was a meeting of the Los Gatos, California City Council last year where the mayor screamed at someone who was giving critical public comment. She said, this isn't your meeting, this is my meeting. Which, you idiot, it's not your meeting. But I think a lot of people like Justin Trudeau are using a strategy very deliberately. And a lot of people in what I'll call the governing class have absorbed a set of ideological givens that they can no longer see a way that any of those things are wrong. So if anyone says something against any of those, obviously they should shut up because they're obviously wrong and obviously crazy. And how can you even say that? I think there's a group that are strategizing and a group that have mediocre minds and can't participate in the discussion.
Well, I do wonder, after also 2.5 years in, COVIDia land, where we were encouraged to rat each other out and turn people over to the police if they weren't obeying the edict of the week. I do believe that there's been some kind of a profound change in how we see each other. I mean, and it gives me anxiety. And I'm not sure why I have anxiety around it. It may be because I feel that logic and human connection are not enough to bridge the gap anymore. I see a wildness and an unwieldiness about what's happening in this division between the two camps, you know?
Yeah.
And that scares me. It's upsetting. I don't know how to talk to people anymore.
You should have anxiety about it. And you should be scared of it. My school district, I live in a small town with a 5-school district. You know, 1 high school, 1 middle school, and 3 elementary schools in a very little place. And we had, being in California, we had a year of online Zoom school. And a bunch of parents, not all of them, but a bunch of parents were saying, like, we need to get our children back in school. This is, it's isolating to them. It's emotionally harmful. It's socially harmful. They're learning less. They're not having human interaction. You can't really do kindergarten or first grade on Zoom. And we need to fix this. We need to get back in school. And the teachers union, TASP, Teachers Association of South Pasadena, took out full-page ads in the 2 local newspapers that said that reopening the schools in August of 2021 and actually having in-person school again was murder. That the people who were proposing to reopen the schools were murdering teachers, and they were mass murderers, and they should be regarded as killers, and we should treat them the way we would treat any murderer in our community. And the school board, I mean, to their credit, I was kind of surprised the school board stood up to this, said, that's nice, we're going back to school, you know, be there, get another job, and school reopened, and no teachers were murdered by the virus.
But it's great that the school opened, Chris. But
it is great.
That view was held by people who are teaching your kids.
And
that's scary. That exists, right?
And here's the important part. They said that. They were proved wrong. They said if children return to school, all the teachers will die. We returned to school, no teachers died. And we never revisited that. We never had another discussion about that. I've tried locally to sort of spark a discussion about the fact that TASP said that if they went back to school, they'd all drop dead, and they didn't. But no one will discuss it. So we have these moments of explosive, hysterical, rage-driven discussions. I don't know if you remember in the United States, net neutrality being repealed by the FCC.
Yes. And
people said, you know, if net neutrality is repealed, people will die. It will be the end of the internet. And tens of millions of people won't be able to use the internet anymore, get any information, and it will ruin their lives, and people will be killed. And we repealed net neutrality. Nothing at all happened. It had no apparent effect to me as an internet user or anybody else. And we never revisited it. So over and over and over and over and over again, we say, if you don't do exactly what I want you to do, everybody's going to die. And then we do it and nobody dies. And people get away with it. Nobody's held accountable for it. Nobody is forced to revisit the fact that they said, if you do X, everyone will die, and we did X, and nobody died. Nobody's ever forced to answer for that kind of rhetoric. And it's interesting that the extremist rhetoric, the dangerous far-right extremist rhetoric, is always on the other side of it. The people saying, actually, I think net neutrality, I think we can repeal net neutrality, it won't be a big deal. Actually, I think we could go outside, you know, into a city park or walk down the sidewalk without a mask and no one will die. That's extremist rhetoric.
Yeah.
But, the teachers will die. That's not selfish. And somehow losing the accountability in those discussions, however that's happened, has been really devastating to us in communities, in countries, and societies at every level. I see my community as a broken community. I see my little town as being dominated by anti-discourse discourse. And I see,
it's an interesting phrase,
I see the world that way. You can't say that.
Yeah.
Why are you saying that?
And why are you thinking that?
Because it's literally factually true. I'm saying because it's literally factually true. Here's how I can show you that that's factually true. But we're so dominated by anti-discourse discourse and by hysterical attacks on discourse that we can't even get to a discussion. And if you feel anxiety about that, you're having a healthy reaction.
Well, I do. And part of it is that, we've been on this show for, 2.5 years now, doing a lot of COVID, what's considered sort of COVID heretical coverage, which is to say science-based criticism of the many, many mistakes they made. And when you swim around in that long enough, you realize, to your point, that nobody is who is going after Randy Weingarten after she essentially kept the schools closed for 1.5 years with really heated rhetoric? That's just gone now. And she actually is quoted as saying a couple of weeks ago that it's a shame that so many kids were damaged by the school closures, as if she'd had nothing to do with it. Like, we live in a world where people do insane things. And when the insane thing doesn't happen, they predict insane things. Like you say, there's no accountability. We just move on to the next hysteria, don't we?
Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, just said in a speech, boy, and all the harm that was caused by schools being closed and children being kept home. What a terrible mistake that was. Talking about what we read on Substack, the page Bad Catitude.
Love the Bad Catitude, yeah.
Calls this jersey switching. Like changing into the other team's uniform. Yeah. And there's a lot of jersey switching going on, and it's really remarkably shameless.
Well, and you know how they get away with it? They get away with it because if it weren't, Substack is the only place people are saying, wait a minute, last year she was calling for, because the legacy media is letting them get away with it.
Yeah.
And they know the legacy media lets them get away with it. So they can just blatantly contradict something they said 6 months ago and no one says anything.
But I don't think it works. I don't think it works anymore. I think legacy media cover for that behavior. I think David Burge says on Iowa Hawk on his Twitter feed that the job of the news media is to cover the really important stories, to cover them with a pillow until they stop moving. I don't think it works anymore, and I think like Deborah Birx did an interview a few weeks ago, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, where she said, I always knew these vaccines weren't going to stop infection.
I know.
I think the fact that the news media doesn't go back and show you, doesn't create that 3-minute spot showing you on the TV news that she's engaged in jersey switching, I don't think anybody doesn't notice that. Like, we all know what Kathy Hochul said. We all know what Gavin Newsom said. We all know what Deborah Birx said. We all know what Anthony Fauci said. We know what these people said. And it doesn't matter if the news media tries to prevent us from seeing it. We know. So I actually think the news media is rendering itself useless and unimportant and ignored by pretending it can do that kind of narrative policing, because it can't, because people remember. And there's video on the internet. So we know what you said. It doesn't work.
That would be a great film project, just to sort of do a documentary of nothing but archival footage of them saying one thing and then saying they didn't say that thing. I mean, that is the whole COVID story from my perspective. Can I switch up a little bit? You and I have not talked about Donald Trump in a meaningful way, and I think we should, and I actually don't know what your position is because you don't really write about him very often.
Yeah.
And I'm really struggling. Of course, I will say, yeah, he's flawed, he's vulgar, and blah. You have to always put a disclaimer on it, like you do when you say you haven't had the vaccine. But let me just quickly tell you, my view is that he was never given a chance to govern, and that because everybody was so telling lies and doing anything they could to get rid of him and all that stuff, that I think he sort of deserves a chance. I never thought I would ever say that, but I'm such a champion of the underdog, and I do feel he was the underdog, given all the lies that were told about him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know he's super flawed and he's probably a narcissist and I didn't think he was bad at running the country. But anyway, so that's what I think. What do you think? That's what I want.
First person elected to the presidency who's been flawed and a narcissist. They're usually such balanced people.
Yeah.
We could probably talk about this for 2 hours. Donald Trump is, first of all, not as important. I think the purpose of Donald Trump, I think he has become a shiny object. If you read Politico, I read Politico every day, or at least I skim Politico, just to see what, sort of dunderheaded, non-thinking, establishment-aligned, credentialed fools want to think. And as inflation spins out of control and the war of Ukraine grinds on endlessly and lots of people die for what should have been a preventable war or a war that should have been settled by now, as energy costs in Europe spike, as serious real-world things that reach into people's lives in very deeply meaningful ways are going wrong. Every headline in Politico is Trump, 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 Trump.
Yeah.
Here's another thing that Trump did. Trump, Trump, Trump. And we need to think about new information about January 6th, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
There's no question about what any of that is. That's an attempt, first of all, of people who don't want to notice that their worldview and their network of alliances isn't working. It's a way of not talking about something, I think.
Yeah.
And we're using him. We're using the figure of Donald Trump. I say to friends all the time, Donald Trump isn't a person anymore. He's the image of the Wizard of Oz projected on the screen. We're no longer talking about anything that he actually personally does. We're talking about how we can distract from things that are happening in the real world. I think Donald Trump is a flawed person. We all think Donald Trump is a flawed person. We all think most politicians are flawed people. I think he made a terrible mistake citing the order to rush the vaccines.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But in every goddamn administration for the last 30 years, we've had a new war or a six-pack of new wars. And now we're fighting a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. The Chinese government is ramping up their sort of provocation with regard to Taiwan and pushing warships and airplanes closer and closer to Taiwan. And the world is becoming less peaceful. And the thing I notice about Donald Trump is, for 4 years, we didn't start a new war.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. And I remember when Donald Trump ordered the drone strike on General Soleimani, the Iranian general.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember listening to NPR. I also, because I listen to NPR for the same reason I read Politico. For 4 days after that strike, every NPR, all things considered, today we look at World War III and the opening salvos. And where will the first bombs explode? And experts say there's no hope to avoid a global conflagration because of Donald Trump's profoundly dangerous and reckless action. And then on the 5th day, I turned on NPR and the music played and they said, well, Star Wars has been very important for 30 years, but what about gender representation in Star Wars? And they just suddenly magically pivoted and realized they weren't going to get their world war and stop talking about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I appreciate Donald Trump not starting new wars. I appreciate Donald Trump telling the military, I want troops out of Syria. I see that people in the military bragged about lying to Donald Trump to prevent troops from being removed. They said, look how proud we are that we were able to monkey wrench Donald Trump's effort to remove troops from Syria. I see that he was committed, he said as a candidate, for the last, 2 or 3 decades, we've been constantly fighting stupid wars We need to stop doing that. I appreciated that. I think that there were things that he was not just right about, but extremely insightful about. And I see that he was monkey wrenched and obstructed. And I agree with you that he was not allowed to govern, or was not allowed to govern as effectively, as cleanly as he should have been able to do. And there's a hysteria to it. There's a hysteria too. I thought the level of hysteria, I think it's just fine to criticize him. I think it's just fine to disagree with him. I think it's just fine to say he's not a good president. But the level of pants on fire hysteria, I thought was just insane. And part and parcel of all the other hysteria, of all the other, if you reopen the schools, you're murdering everyone. The way we talk about Donald Trump is now the way we talk about politics, and it's nuts.
Ooh, that's scary. And of course, Sam Harris.
I don't know about Sam Harris.
Oh, I wrote a whole Substack about it. I'll send it to you. Sam Harris was being interviewed. I don't know how you missed this, Chris. It was sort of a big deal for about 15 minutes, like everything today. But he was being interviewed by the guys in the UK. I think their show is called Trigonometry or something. They're two kind of unwoke, cool British guys. And Sam Harris said he is renowned for his level of Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, it's off the charts, call the ambulance level stuff. He said, I don't care if Hunter Biden had dead children in the basement. If it meant preventing Trump from getting another term as president, I was fine with hiding the laptop story. So it was the dead children thing that really got people.
And it just disappeared into the flood of sewage. I forgot it for a moment. I had to pull it up. It's similar to what Bill Maher just said to Rob Reiner. Bill Maher said to Rob Reiner on his HBO show, he said, we think Donald Trump is very bad. So does that mean that anything at all that we do to stop Trump is justified? Does that mean that there are no moral or ethical or legal boundaries when we confront Donald Trump because he's bad, so anything we do to stop him is good? And Rob Reiner sort of went like, well, January 6th, you're saying you like insurrection. You're like, he couldn't even hear the question. And he's right. Bill Maher was right. Bill Maher is not my favorite human being in the world, but when he's right, he's right. He said,
courageously, right.
If we think this is a bad person, can we do anything at all to stop him? Or are there still rules?
And the sad moment for me in that is that Rob Reiner is such a fun film director. You know, he's a person who creatively I really admire. Misery. I think he did Misery and When Harry Met Sally. Yeah. Princess Bride. I mean, you know, I want to just take him out for a coffee and say, dude, like, hear me out. You know, you're not right about this, or you're too invested in an opinion that shouldn't be that definitively held. You know, I just don't understand. His Twitter feed is a nightmare. I don't know if you've ever seen his Twitter feed, but he just
would avoid it. You do not want to take Rob Reiner out for coffee. I don't. You would suffer. I live in LA, and you know, just about everybody I know, all my friends and family and everybody is in the entertainment industry, and I listen to this all day, every day.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know then. Then I'll just sort of dislike him for more than one reason. But that you're right about the Bill Maher thing and the Sam Harris thing too, because it was really interesting. A couple days before that happened, I wrote a piece about Salman Rushdie and how all the cowardly lefty authors who should have been standing up and saying this is terrible and who were kind of silent, right? And I found that, have you seen that not Matt Damon, who was his Ben Affleck, the Ben Affleck moment on Bill Maher with Sam Harris, where they get into a big argument about Islam. And of course, Ben Affleck, being super woke and not very bright, was rabidly, wokedly defending that there's nothing bad in Islam at all. You just can't say anything bad. And Sam Harris and Bill Maher were landing some really good points about the kind of extreme side of Islam. And so I wrote a thing saying, isn't it great that they have the courage to make that argument? And then 2 days later, he kind of exploded. Sam Harris exploded onto a new thing. But Trump is a blind spot for many, many smart people, sadly.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are ways to criticize him.
Many.
There are things you can say, but if you start out always saying that he's literally Adolf Hitler times a million, no, the level of hysteria has actually. I'm thinking at this point, and I'm not the first person to say this. I forget who wrote this piece making this argument. But the number of times people have said, like, no, we got Trump now. He's ruined. He's finished. And he survives, right? Like, now we're going to impeach him again. And then he's still standing. I think it's beginning. I don't think it's beginning. I think it has worked for him. I think it benefits him. I think if he was subjected to ordinary political criticism, he would be less popular and less powerful. But the degree to which people say things that are absolutely obviously insane at this crazy fever pitch allows him to evade criticism by making the criticism of him seem inherently crazy.
Yeah, that's really smart, actually, and true. I mean, I think it is true. People weren't arguing so much with his policies, but rather saying, "Oh, he's going to, hit the nuclear button, or he's going to, he's colluding with." Remember, he was colluding with Putin. Putin put him in office, and they were colluding in his server, and it was madness. And not really talking about the things he was doing, and maybe because they'd lose the argument on some of the things he wanted to do, But the sad thing about Trump, and then we'll move on, but the sad thing for me about Trump is this, and I can't get past this because it's kind of my bag, and that is, he was elected democratically and fairly by millions of Americans, many of whom were absolutely hopeless about the trajectory that the country and their lives were taking. And he was their president. And so to impede his office the way that the Democrats and the media did was actually an assault on those people. Let's talk about why everybody's mad. I'm sure that's one of the reasons a lot of Americans are mad. Like they were deprived of having the president that they voted for.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a congresswoman. She represents Washington, D.C., so she is a non-voting representative of Washington, D.C., named Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's been in politics for a long time. I think she's been there for decades. And when Hillary Clinton said famously in a speech that Trump supporters were a basket of deplorables, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's very, very liberal, who's was a Hillary Clinton supporter and hated Donald Trump and always will, said, we don't talk that way.
Wow.
You attack your political opponent. You do not attack voters. You do not attack the other side's voters. You do not attack ordinary people. You do not attack people outside of politics. That is not the way we speak. And what's happening now is that hysterical attack on a president who represented a large group of Americans is turning into an attack on that large group of Americans. Yeah. And Kathy Hochul, again, just said in a speech, if you're a Trump supporter or you support Ron DeSantis or any of these people, we don't want you in New York. Get on a bus and get out of our state. You're not New Yorkers. Charlie Crist, running for governor as a Democrat in Florida, said, if you're with Ron DeSantis, stay with him. We don't want you. Go be alone with your hate, with that hate you have in your heart. So it has turned into a sustained attack on anyone who disagrees. If you disagree with current thing, if you disagree with whatever today's narrative is, we don't want you in our state. Get out and go live somewhere else. And that's insane.
It's really shocking.
It's eliminationist language. I mean, on its face, it's eliminationist language. We have a society, we have a community that we don't want you to be a part of. We order you to leave it. That's eliminationist language, and it's bizarre that people can use that kind of language so easily and so comfortably, and that's low-hanging fruit to them, and they just toss that out off the cuff in a speech.
Well, they're saying what they really think. The deplorables comment, I talk about it on the show a lot. I play it on the show a lot because I think it was a moment in American political history, I think beyond the event itself, because it did pave the way for this demonization, not just of Trump voters, but I think it kind of framed the current class war, between the laptop class and everybody else who are kind of struggling now. Yeah. I think it was very, very dangerous. I think it exposed everything we need to know about Hillary Clinton. Yeah. And who is a nemesis of mine. I'm like Christopher Hitchens, not as smart at all, but I'm a real Clinton hater. Mm-hmm. And she specifically, because as someone who's actually followed her career, which has not been illustrious at all. Yeah. She's failed at most things, including, she was a terrible Secretary of State. Look at Libya.
I was sitting here waiting to find a place to say the word Libya.
Yeah. And hearing all these young women say, oh, she's the most qualified person running for president. And I'm like, no, get off your social media feeds. Go and actually read some history. She's terrible and she's mean-spirited and also super dishonest. Let's not forget the Clinton Foundation.
And never met a war she didn't like.
Never met a war she didn't like. So that description, I don't know what came over her to do that, but it seemed to be signaling this is our new playbook, right? And now what's Biden saying? The MAGA Republicans? That phrase he's using?
Yeah. I have to narrate what's happening in the room. There are two cats sitting here being taunted by a squirrel, and it's very, very dramatic. The squirrel is shaking its tail at them, and they're quivering. So it's fun to watch. I mentioned SB 1100. Can I circle back to that?
Absolutely, yeah.
SB 1100 is a new state law that just passed, was signed into law, a couple weeks ago in California, that followed a series of controversies in a city in California, Los Gatos, California, near San Jose in the Silicon Valley. And the mayor of Los Gatos last year was pushing, again, a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. And she was very vocally pro-LGBT. And she had a group of critics who live in the city who showed up and criticized her and disagreed with her very harshly. And some of them were really kind of shitty about it. Some of them said things that I would never say. But the news framed all of that disagreement as, local mayor being bullied, anti-vaxxer mobs showing up to bully local mayor. And what people were doing was the public was going to public meetings of their city council and speaking during the public comment portion, during the portion of the meeting set aside for them to speak. People showed up and said, I disagree with you. And sometimes they said it in really nasty ways. And sometimes they screamed and yelled and pounded the podium and were dramatic and overwrought. But it was the public speaking at public comment. And the news framed it as attack on democracy, as brave local mayor is savaged by anti-vaxxer mobs. So the two state legislators, the state senator and the assemblyman who represent the district that Los Gatos is in, introduced legislation, SB 1100, to control the violent, I think they said, disorderly hate speech that's happening at city council meetings. And the bill that they originally introduced said that the presiding officer of a local government meeting, city council, county board of supervisors, water board, school board, any of those, could declare that a meeting had become disorderly and eject either a single public speaker or the public and lock the doors and go on with the public open meeting, but without the public there because the public was disorderly. And, so they say this is not something we're doing that violates the First Amendment because we're not trying to regulate the content of people's speech. But time, place, and manner regulations are constitutional. And we're just trying to regulate the manner in which people speak. We're trying to make sure that people speak in an orderly way. And then they said, so, for example, a disorderly way of speaking would be to use, hate speech. And hate speech is disagreeing. Hate speech is saying, like, I despise your LGBT policy. That's hate speech.
Right.
So we can restrict that, but when we restrict that, when we prevent you from saying those words, we're not regulating the content of your speech. We're regulating the manner of your speech. So SB 1100 was amended in the process of working its way through the legislature, and they removed the language about being able to lock the entire public out of local government meetings. But the version that passed and that was just signed into law allows the presiding officer of a local government meeting to order someone to stop speaking if the presiding officer finds a public comment to be disruptive or inappropriate, and to order people to leave the meeting. Like, I don't like what you said, so I'm ordering you to stop. We're turning off your microphone, and the police are now going to remove you from the room. And one of the things they define as disorderly is personally directed comments. So if you get up and you say, I don't like this policy you're passing, I think you should pass a different policy, you're not disorderly. But if you get up and you say, I think that the mayor is an idiot, and I don't think the mayor should be pushing this policy because she's a fool, then you've engaged in disordered speech. You've engaged in a personal attack, and that's disorderly, and you can be silenced and thrown out of the room. So the state of California has just passed a law with a bunch of vague definitions that say that local governments, cities, counties, school boards, water districts, etc., can implement their own regulations to put it into effect, but that once local governments create the rules putting the state law into effect, local governments can order people to stop speaking and to leave meetings because their public comment is disorderly. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I think it's going to be, I think local governments that are dumb enough to use this and try to put it into effect and say things like, you may not direct a comment to a particular member of the city council. You may not specifically single out a council member for personal criticism because that's disorderly. I think there are going to be a lot of lawsuits. I think there are going to be a lot of confrontations. And I interviewed Simon Campbell from Pensbury over the weekend.
Yes.
And he said when a local government crushes your free speech, when a local government silences you, you have a duty to escalate. You should go provoke them harder, and you should make sure that you get it all on camera. When someone tells you you're not allowed to speak, what he did, when the school board lawyer tried to silence him, he said, I'm not going to be silenced. I'm going to keep speaking. And he did, and he won. I think we're going to see a lot of that, and it's going to be an interesting year in California.
Well, it can't. I'm just guessing that it probably couldn't survive a well-crafted legal challenge. But you know what? Nothing surprises me these days. I no longer have faith in that particular pillar of democracy either. But let's see what happens. To me, it's all about accountability, right? The people who are driven by this ideology have somehow gotten the idea that they are not accountable for what they're doing, and asking them to be accountable is some kind of a moral challenge or something. They just can't accept it. And I don't know how that happened. I just don't know when we crossed that. When we crossed that river. It's really weird.
I say this all the time, but Christopher Lasch and Angelo Codevilla. Christopher Lasch wrote about the development of a technocratic managerial elite as a status group that had a self-identity and that regarded itself as being credentialed and formed by its contempt for middle America, for the stupid people out there in their trailer parks and flyover country. And then Angelo Codevilla wrote about the way that group formed a series of ritual behaviors, or a series of ritual conversations that they use to identify one another, like secret handshakes that they use to tell each other that they're in the group. And I think that development of an identity of like, well, we have credentials and you don't. I think it has gone where we've been doing that for a century now. We've been doing that since the progressive era in the United States, since Woodrow Wilson and even a little before. And it has gone where that road leads after more than a century of developing an identity around the idea that people who disagree with you are not credentialed, trained technocrats like you, like Anthony Fauci saying, well, people who criticize me are criticizing science.
I know.
I mean,
imagine saying that. Yeah. It's like ridiculous.
I think people have talked themselves into an idea of their identity that is false, that is very, very brittle, and that they protect at all costs because they know how easily it will fall apart.
I think also in what you just described is the notion that I don't remember the name of the guy who wrote What's the Matter with Kansas. He's terribly smart.
Thomas Frank?
Yes, Thomas Frank.
Something.
He did a great thing called Listen Liberal, another book called Listen Liberal, where he describes how the left, which is primarily what this class of people is, abandon the working class. They're not even pretending to like them anymore, right? And I think those things probably converged, because they did get from just feeling superior to not just feeling superior, but actually coming to loathe the people in the trailer parks and flyover country too. I mean, they hate them. Yeah, it would seem. Yeah,
it's number one, very, very strange. Number two, it maps out as left versus right. And I don't think it is. I think it falsifies a conflict that's really happening. But look at Fetterman. I forget his first name. Who's running for senator in Pennsylvania?
Oh yeah, the guy who had the stroke.
Guy who had the stroke.
Yeah.
Who shows up at all of his campaign events. You know, he won't wear a suit. He shows up in a rumpled old sweatshirt and a dirty pair of work pants. And Dr. Oz was videotaped in a supermarket asking them where he could find the crudité.
Yeah.
Pardon me, do you have crudité? Shockingly. And so Fetterman's whole campaign now is that he's going around the state, like appearing before union groups and steelworkers. He said before a group of steelworkers, have you ever heard a steelworker ask for crudité? So it's this bizarre sort of fallback on a kind of old Democratic Party working class campaign, and a party that doesn't do that anymore at all. And I thought of Sam the plumber confronting Barack Obama. There was a plumber in the Midwest or somewhere who confronted Barack Obama and told him he was an idiot. And there were months of like this. He became the figure of contempt in 2008. Look at this fool. Look at this atavistic white working class idiot thinking Barack Obama is not a great leader. Sam the plumber became a symbol of how backward the country is. And so the Democratic Party sort of thinks it's Fetterman and sort of thinks it's Barack Obama hating Sam the plumber, to Barack Obama saying the people in middle America cling to their God and their guns because they're so backward. I don't think the Democratic Party knows what it is anymore. I think it's a whole bunch of things that don't fit together, and I think that's probably becoming true of the Republican Party too. I don't think our two-party politics maps onto the schisms in the culture all that cleanly, and it's becoming very strange. And I for a long time, was in California registered decline to state for most of my adult life.
Your political party?
My political party declined to state.
Yeah.
I was an unaffiliated voter, and a couple of years ago, I registered as a Republican for the first time in my life. And if you'd asked me...
I would too now.
10 years ago what my politics were, I would have said I was a small L libertarian.
Me too.
But the weird package of conflicts that are going on, even though I don't think they are, or certainly aren't entirely a left-right conflict, the way they've come to play out, I am now whatever a Republican is, more or less, mostly in a lot of ways. Whether or not it makes any sense, and I think we need some party realignments. I think we need some refiguring. I think the way the conflicts in our culture are working don't map onto our partisan politics at all. Looking at the number of looking at drag queen events for children.
Yeah.
I don't expect that people who... I expect that there are a lot of people who have always regarded themselves as liberal or as progressive wonder what the hell that is. Looking at hospitals saying proudly, we do gender-affirming hysterectomies for children of any age. I assume that there are a bunch of people who've always regarded themselves as liberal or as progressive who look at that and are horrified by it and don't understand what it is. So I don't know that left and right is working for us all that well right now.
No, but I will say, well, look, that's a huge example, and I'm glad you brought it up because, I was pretty left, and then I was kind of like a Bernie supporter. If I was American, I would have been a Bernie supporter. And then that whole thing blew up so badly, and he totally gave up the ghost of his supporters to support Hillary, knowing she even rigged the primary against him, and he's saying to his people, go, what? Like, he's so corrupt. Anyway, that's another story. And then I became what I was calling myself a Woody Guthrie libertarian, because I'm sort of small libertarian, but very soft spot for the I always say the working man, which is kind of a dated phrase, but for working people, right? But now when you said Republican, I thought, if I was American, I probably would be Republican now, just because of the unfairness of what's happened and because things are so spun out. Like the drag queen and children thing, I'm actually writing about it right now, and I've been screening a lot of tapes of parents at these shows encouraging their kids to slip money to the drink. Now, do they not know that that's a strip club thing?
Or the opposite. Children dancing and having men in the audience come up and give them dollar bills.
Oh, God. I mean, why? Like,
an 8-year-old,
can't you see that?
An 8-year-old shaking her sexy little ass and getting dollar bills. Right.
I know. I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't I feel that tells me then that there is a fealty to some kind of ideology that supersedes their logical minds now. And that is frightening for me, because you have to tamp down your feeling that something is terribly wrong if you're sitting in that environment and cheering for it, right? Unless you're completely stupid.
It's status anxiety and social positioning. It's class war. I mean, you said this a few minutes ago, and I think you're right. It is, the Trump people are against this drag queen thing, so it must be good. I'm not some right winger. It's not people analyzing what it is and thinking about what's actually happening. It's people thinking about who are my opponents, who's against this, and how do I want to position myself as a matter of socioeconomic class.
It's really interesting too, because back in the day when I was much more left of center, I was a bit of an advocate for gay rights, especially when I was covering AIDS back in the 80s. And I always loved drag queens. They were a lot of fun. We used to go to the shows at one of them where we, close the bar and then go to a drag queen show. And they were fun and great and talented and stuff. And I'm wondering what are they thinking about this? I don't they're not bad people, right? I mean, I understand it is with some people it's fetishistic, and I don't dig that they're allowed to have all of these rights around actual women, right? That bugs me. But why are they playing this role? I don't understand what they're getting out of it, because they must know what's wrong.
There was. Did you see the footage of the gay pride parade in Wales last week?
No.
That threw the lesbians out?
Oh, I did. I couldn't believe it.
That threw the lesbians out because they were TERFs. They were trans-exclusionary radical feminist lesbians. And there were the transgender participants in the Pride March were offended, were biological men who were offended that lesbians were participating who didn't accept that they were women. So they told the police they felt threatened, and the police threw lesbians out of a gay pride march. So,
I know.
So what we were just talking about, the left and right breaking down, the political parties not mapping cleanly onto the cultural conflicts. When lesbians are being thrown out of gay pride marches, that's happening all over the culture. We have a disordering of identities and alignments and affiliations that's spinning out of control, that has attained this force that is tearing apart old conceptions of our identities and our affiliations.
It feels very Fall of Rome to me. If you're looking at one of those children with a massively obese a drag queen performer in a bikini, or one of the kids at the gay pride events who were having kind of inappropriate moments with men wearing black leather thongs and sticking their butts out. If you're not reacting to that as a mother or even just a citizen, then something has happened that we should be very, very afraid of.
Yeah. People have lost their ability to judge things as the things that they are, and are judging things on this basis of who's on the other side and opposition and cultural signaling, cultural positioning in ways that are really obvious and that can't be sustained. I call my Substack page, "Tell me how this ends," because I don't see it going on. I don't see a way for this to end well, and I don't see a way for it to not be brought to a conclusion in the foreseeable future. We've established a set of cultural conflicts that are unsustainable, that are very damaging and unsustainable.
I agree. So there's so much I should have you on every week, but I want to get to maybe where we're going to end the conversation, because this will probably be a lengthy discussion too. And that is, given everything that we've talked about today, it's easy to feel hopeless, and I can't not feel hopeless based on what I'm seeing. But how do we survive this intact? I hear from listeners who say, let's just go start our own country or our own community, and we'll homeschool our kids, or we'll, whatever. And I, that's kind of an extreme position, but exposure to this is not good for us. And also our powerlessness right now, because the media is captured, is also not good. So how do we spiritually kind of maintain as we go through this really, really dark period in history?
As someone who lives in California,
and
as someone who lives in Los Angeles, I'm not doing that well at answering that question in my own life, and I feel it. there's a strange sort of feeling in the air, I think, in Los Angeles right now, and a feeling of unhealth, and a way that people talk to each other, and a way that our politics doesn't work, that I personally really struggle to know how to position myself in it. And my big answer has always been put the tent in the car. I think you have to leave. I think you have to leave the city from time to time. I think you have to leave the dailiness of your life from time to time and travel and go see somewhere else and get offline. Really important to get offline. But ultimately, I struggle. I struggle to know the answer to that, and I don't feel that healthy myself these days. Tucker Carlson gave a great interview to an 18-year-old kid. Did you see that?
No.
I think he was maybe he was a high school student, maybe he was a college student, but a student called Tucker Carlson and said, "I'd like to interview you." And Tucker Carlson gave him an hour-long interview.
Wow.
And Tucker Carlson currently is doing his show from his home studio, not in New York or in Washington, D.C., and talked about, he said, first of all, get offline, don't watch a lot of television. An interesting thing for Tucker Carlson, for a television personality to say, don't watch a lot of television, don't spend a lot of time staring at a screen, go to nature, go get out go see some trees, and he said, get married, find someone who's a good spouse, get married, have some children, have a family, have a group of people in your home who are connected to you and support you, and focus on them and tune out the other conversations as much as you can, and live in the real world and don't live on screens. I thought it was a spectacular set of life advice. Live with people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Live with people, live among people, live in nature to the greatest extent possible.
Get a dog.
Tune out of the noise. Or we were going to get a dog and then I lost and we got 2 cats, and I'm glad they're here. And so is the squirrel.
I understand that Tucker has 4 dogs and that they sleep on the bed, which of course made me really like him, because he looks like he might be a little persnickety. So dealing with a dog's dirty paw prints on the sheets, I like him. Tell me, I know you did a big interview with him. What was that like and what was he like?
It was really enjoyable. I have never done television before, and I was a little nervous about how I would do. But I found, talking to him, I found remarkably easy. And he did an interview with Ben Smith. I've talked about this on my Substack page. He did an interview with Ben Smith, where Ben Smith sort of showed up with a handful of questions written on a note card.
Yeah, and then I saw this. It was brilliant. Yeah.
Didn't listen to anything Tucker Carlson said. He said, you're very racist, aren't you? And Tucker Carlson said, I'm a Christian and I believe that every human being is God's creation, and I absolutely don't believe that race matters at all. I believe that we're all children of God. And Ben Smith sort of stared at his note card and said, but aren't you a white nationalist? And it wasn't an interview. It was Ben Smith saying the little set of things he'd written down on a note card, and then
media matters.
Not hearing a word that the person sitting across from him said, not a single word. And the thing I found interesting about Tucker Carlson is that he is an interviewer. He listens to what you say. He hears it. He follows up on it. He notices the pieces you've missed, and he makes sure that you get them in. And he clearly has been doing it for a long time. So it was a really enjoyable experience. An enjoyable experience talking to people. Like, I talked to David Gornowski, whose politics are not exactly my politics. I talked to Tucker Carlson, whose politics are probably not exactly my politics. Talk to you, your politics are probably not exactly my politics. It's great. I enjoy talking to people who have an ability to listen and to just have a discussion. Well,
and thinking, right? We're all trying to figure figure it out. And it's, you know, we don't live in easy times right now.
Yeah.
And I'm with you about the nature. I just got a new dog. Our other dog died of cancer about 6 weeks ago or so.
Oh, no.
And I was really, really down about it because I'm a very, very invested dog person. But we just got this little girl she'd been in a shelter in Mexico for 4 years.
Wow. What kind of dog?
She's 6. Well, she's I would say a border collie, probably lab and maybe corgi mix because her legs are a little bit shorter than normal. But she was left to die in a field tied to a fence, and she's just had the worst possible time.
Wow.
And she's a magnificent, magnificent spirit. Doesn't have a violent or aggressive bone in her body. She's very shy, and we're working on that. But it's just life-changing to have a dog in the house again. People say, how can you get a dog so soon? You're being really disloyal to Katie's memory. And I don't think so. Like, I just need a dog in the house. It's kind of who I am. And yeah, so I'm happy about that. But I'm glad you did Tucker. I think that's wonderful. And I'm glad you always say always say yes to us as well. It's really, I always feel better after talking to you. Like I've kind of cleansed my palate a bit cognitively, you know.
I'm glad that you ask.
Yeah, well, thank you. So I didn't get to a whole bunch of stuff, so I'm going to be emailing you again sometime soon. But thanks so much for doing this. And please survive California. I hear it's a nightmare. Toronto's getting there. Yeah.
Just terrible, but we could always go camping.
Yeah, camping is good. Okay, friend, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Good to talk to you.
So that was Chris Bray. Isn't he amazing? I just love talking to him, and I hope that we can have him on more often. I do only a weekly show, but maybe once in a while I'll just do a special with Chris, like once a month or something. Let me know, because there were a million other things we could have talked about. Do go to his Substack, which is, it's Chris and then Bray on Substack. And I think it's called How Will This End? I think that's what he said. But I read it every day, so I think it's really worth it. Let's talk for a minute about the new vaccine coming out. It was approved today. And I'm just looking at something that Marty McCary wrote and something he tweeted about. It's quite interesting. They approved this product without anybody being able to see human trials data, right? So, and as I understand it, it was approved on the basis of the way it responded in 8 mice. So they are not even trying to hide stuff anymore. Like when the first vaccine came out, as you guys know, I was up in arms. It was a truncated clinical trials process, and it should have gone on for 8 years. And how can you know there won't be trouble down the road if you don't study it for that period of time? All of those were logical, non-anti-vaxxer, legitimate criticisms that 3 years ago were normal scientific discourse around new pharmaceutical products. It was just a normal discussion. The FDA, that's what they do. They monitor those things. So now with this new Omicron vaccine, first of all, you have to get 2 shots of the old one before you can get the new one. And the second, they're not even trying to hide it. They barely tested it, according to what Marty McCary is saying today, and others too. So I don't know where this is going. The standards for safety and efficacy on a lot of fronts through the COVID-19 nightmare. And I'm not talking about the virus nightmare. I'm talking about the public health policy nightmare here. The standards have been eroded. As you know, the medical journals don't seem to be playing straight and fair anymore. They cannot be relied on to be neutral arbiters. At least most of them can't. The BMJ is still pretty good. We can't trust our public health officials to do what is right. all they focused on was suppressing the virus, despite how bad the collateral damage was for all of us and our children, and closing the schools. I mean, all of it has been eroded in this last 2.5 years. So, I get why people listen to guys like Alex Jones. I think he's kind of a funny, clownish, but interesting guy who actually was right about a lot of things. But we see this erosion, and you have to wonder what is at play. Can it just be about money? Do they think so little of us that we don't require published data before you approve a vaccine that many people will probably take, probably less than they think? What is going on here? None of it makes any sense anymore. So, we will be here. We're going to keep going, trying to sort this stuff out. As you know, I have weeks where I'm very, very optimistic, and I think we're going to get to the bottom of the way we've been living for the last 2 years. But, then something will happen like this, like the release of this new vaccine and the 8 mice. We'll call it the 8 mouse vaccine. And I just think, what the hell are they thinking? It makes absolutely no sense. So please stay on this journey with us here at Trish Wood is Critical. I love hearing from all of you. I can't always respond, although I am trying. I might just take my laptop away for the weekend and just do all my emails, because I do read them, and I'm very, very moved by what many of you say. So thank you for that. It means a lot. And I will close by saying, stay critical. See ya.